Have you ever smiled at someone just to hide the fact that you didn't understand a single word they said? That awkward, frozen grin that says, "I'm fine," while inside you're screaming? I lived that smile every day for 2 years. But here's what I never expected. That same awkward smile brought me love, a family, and finally trained my ears to hear English like a native.
No textbooks. No boring drills.
Just a messy, beautiful American life.
Stay with me.
The awkward smile that started everything. Picture this. You're standing in a coffee shop in Seattle. Rain is tapping on the window like an impatient drummer. The barista, a cheerful guy with a beanie and a nose ring, just asked you something. You heard the words cream and sugar, but everything else was a blur of sound, like someone put a pillow over your ears right when he started talking. So you do what your survival instinct tells you. You smile. Not a confident Hollywood smile.
No.
This is the awkward smile. The one where your lips press together a little too tight, your eyes widen just a fraction too much, and your head gives a tiny nod that says yes, even though you have no idea what you just agreed to. That was me. 7 years ago. Fresh off a plane from a country where English was just a subject in school, not a weapon you use to order coffee, flirt with strangers, or explain why you're crying at 2 a.m. Let me rewind a little further. Before that awkward smile became the most important tool in my language learning arsenal, I was what you'd call a serious student. I had notebooks filled with verb conjugations. I had apps that reminded me daily to practice. I could write a perfect email in English. I could read a New York Times article with a dictionary by my side. But speaking, listening, my brain froze the moment a real human opened their mouth. You know that feeling, don't you? You've studied for months, maybe years. You know the grammar rules. You can name every tense. But then someone says, "Hey, what's up?" And your mind goes completely blank. Because what's up isn't in your textbook. Or they say, "I'm just messing with you," and you think they're talking about making a mess. Or worse, they say something nice, and you smile awkwardly because you're too embarrassed to admit you didn't catch a single word. Here's the science part, but I'll make it fun. Your brain has something called auditory processing speed. When you learn a language in a classroom, your brain gets used to slow, clear, perfect pronunciation. But real native speech is a different beast entirely. Native speakers connect words. What do you becomes what I ya. They drop sounds, probably becomes probably. And they speak at about 150 to 200 words per minute. Your poor classroom-trained brain is used to 80 words per minute. So when reality hits, your brain panics. And what does panic look like? That's right. The awkward smile. I wore that smile like a second face. At the grocery store when the cashier asked, "Paper or plastic?" and I just nodded. At the DMV when the clerk said something about proof of residency, and I smiled like I totally understood while sweating through my shirt. At a party where someone told a joke, everyone laughed, and I laughed 3 seconds late because I was still translating in my head. But the most important awkward smile? That happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was at a small cafe near my apartment. My go-to place because the menu had pictures so I could just point. I was holding my latte looking for a seat when I accidentally made eye contact with the guy sitting by the window. He had kind eyes and a book in his hand. And instead of looking away like a normal person, I froze. My face did the thing. The tight-lipped, wide-eyed, weird little nod. And he smiled back. Not awkwardly. Genuinely. Then he said something. Something like, "Tough day?" Or, "You look lost." Honestly, I didn't fully understand. But his tone was warm. So I did what I always did. I smiled again. And this time, I added a small laugh. A nervous, haha that was supposed to mean, "I'm fine, but also please don't talk to me because I'll embarrass myself." But he didn't walk away. He pointed to the empty chair across from him. And he said very slowly, "Do you want to sit?" Those 5 words.
Slow, clear, kind.
I understood every single one. And for the first time in months, I didn't smile awkwardly. I nodded. A real nod. And I sat down. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I suddenly became fluent. Not because I found a magic trick. But because I realized something that no teacher had ever told me. You don't need perfect English to connect with another human being. You just need one genuine moment. One word. One smile, even an awkward one. Over the next few weeks, that guy, let's call him Jake, became my accidental English tutor. He didn't know he was teaching me. He just knew I was the girl who smiled weirdly and said sorry my English a lot. But he was patient. He repeated things without making me feel stupid. He used his hands when he talked. He texted me instead of calling because he knew I needed time to read and respond. And slowly, without textbooks, without flashcards, without any of the things I thought I needed, my ears started to wake up. But that's a story for the next section. Because before I could train my ears, I had to survive my first real flirting disaster. And let me tell you, it was bad. Like, I accidentally said I was pregnant when I meant I was tired bad.
So here's what I want you to do right now.
Think about your own awkward smile. The last time you pretended to understand. The last time you laughed at a joke you didn't get. That's not weakness. That's the starting line. And if you stay with me through this story, I promise you'll see that smile differently by the end. Why my ears felt like they were filled with cotton. So there I was, sitting across from Jake in that coffee shop, feeling like a spy who had accidentally wandered into a foreign country without a decoder ring. He was talking. His lips were moving. Sounds were coming out. But inside my head, everything was muffled. Like someone had stuffed my ears with cotton balls right before a really important conversation. Let me give you an example. Jake said something that sounded like, "So, would you do for a living?" I blinked. My brain scrambled. Was that English? Did he ask me what I do for a living? Or did he ask what I do for fun? Or did he just ask if I like living here? 3 possibilities, 0 confidence. So, I did what every terrified language learner does. I smiled, nodded, and said, "Yes." He laughed. Not a mean laugh. A confused, sweet laugh. "Yes to what?" he asked. And that's when I realized my awkward smile had officially backfired. Now I had to actually answer. So I took a deep breath and said, "Sorry, my English is not good. Can you slow?"
He did. He slowed down so much it was almost funny. What do you do?
For work. Each word a tiny island. No connection between them. "I am teacher," I said.
But now no job.
"I learn English." He nodded. Then he asked another question. And another. And somehow, through a combination of my broken sentences, his patient listening, and a lot of hand gestures, we had an actual conversation. A real one. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. By the end, I was exhausted. My brain felt like it had run a marathon. But I was also happy. Because for the first time, someone didn't walk away. Now, let's talk about why my ears felt like they were filled with cotton in the first place. Because I want you to understand something important. It wasn't that I was stupid. It wasn't that I hadn't studied. I had studied for years. I knew over 5,000 words. I could read a novel. But listening? That's a completely different skill. Here's the fun science part. Your ears don't actually hear words. Your brain does. Sound waves hit your eardrum, get turned into electrical signals, and travel to your auditory cortex. That part works fine. The problem is what happens next. Your brain has to take those signals, Recognize where one word ends and the next begins. Match them to words in your memory. And then understand the meaning, all in a fraction of a second. Native speakers don't put spaces between words. Think about it. When you hear "How are you," your brain automatically splits it into "How are you?" But that's because you've heard that sequence thousands of times. Your brain has a shortcut, a neural pathway that's been paved smooth by repetition. Now, imagine you're learning English. Your brain hasn't paved those pathways yet. Every sound is new. Every word boundary is a puzzle. So when a native speaker says, "Wadioanato" at 180 words per minute, your poor brain is still trying to figure out where wad ends and dia begins. By the time you've processed the first 3 sounds, the speaker has already finished the sentence and moved on to the next one. That's why you feel exhausted after just 10 minutes of listening. That's why you want to give up. That's why you hide in the bathroom at parties or pretend your phone is ringing. Your brain isn't broken. It's just overwhelmed. I remember one night about 3 months after I arrived in the US. I was living in a small apartment with 2 roommates, both native speakers. They were watching a reality TV show in the living room. I was in my bedroom trying to study, but I could hear them laughing through the wall. Loud, genuine belly laughs. And I felt this wave of loneliness hit me so hard I almost cried. Because I wanted to laugh with them. I wanted to understand the joke. But the TV was too fast. The slang was too new. The cultural references, some celebrity I'd never heard of, some meme I'd never seen, flew right over my head. I grabbed my phone. I opened Google. I typed, "Why can't I understand native English speakers even though I studied for years?" And I found a forum post that changed everything. Someone wrote, "You're not bad at English. You're just not trained to hear it yet. Listening is a muscle. And right now, your muscle is atrophied." That word, atrophied. It hit me like a bucket of cold water. Because it was true. I had spent years reading and writing. I had trained my reading muscle. I had trained my writing muscle. But my listening muscle? I had barely touched it. In class, my teachers spoke slowly and clearly. On listening exams, the audio was clean and artificial. Real life wasn't clean. Real life was messy, fast, full of mumbling and jokes and sarcasm and interruptions. So, I made a decision that night. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped hiding behind my awkward smile. And I started training my ears, not like a student but like an athlete. I didn't buy a textbook. I didn't sign up for a course.
I just changed how I spent my time.
Instead of watching shows with subtitles in my language, I watched them with English subtitles. Then, without any subtitles, I listened to the same podcast episode 10 times until I could hear every word. I practiced shadowing, repeating what I heard out loud, trying to match the rhythm and intonation. And slowly, painfully, the cotton started to come out of my ears. But here's the part no one tells you. The hardest part wasn't the listening. The hardest part was the embarrassment. The hardest part was sitting across from Jake, wanting to say something funny or smart, and instead just smiling awkwardly because you can't find the words. The hardest part was feeling like a child in an adult's body. But Jake didn't care. And that's the secret I want you to hold on to. Most people don't care if your English is perfect. They care if you're trying. They care if you're kind. They care if you smile, even awkwardly. By the end of that first month of knowing Jake, I had made about 1,000 mistakes. I had said, "I am boring," when I meant, "I am bored." I had said, "I feel hungry for you," when I meant, "I'm hungry," and also, "I like you." I had mixed up embarrassed and pregnant more times than I want to admit. But every mistake made me braver. And every awkward smile brought us closer. So, here's my question for you. What would happen if you stopped trying to be perfect? What would happen if you let yourself be awkward, make mistakes, laugh at yourself? Because that's where real learning happens. Not in the quiet library, not in the grammar workbook, but in the messy, noisy, beautiful chaos of real life. And if you stay with me, I'll tell you about the time I tried to flirt using textbook English and failed so spectacularly that it almost killed the romance before it even started. The flirting mistake that almost killed the romance. So, here's the thing about Jake. By week 3 of our accidental coffee shop friendship, I had developed a tiny problem. A very specific, very embarrassing problem. I liked him. Not in a he's a nice person way. In a I rehearse conversations in the shower way. In a I check my phone every 4 minutes to see if he texted way. But how do you flirt with someone when you can barely order a sandwich? How do you say, I think you're cute without accidentally saying, I think you're fruit? Because trust me, I've done that. Cute and fruit are not the same word. But when you're nervous and your brain is translating at the speed of a dying laptop, mistakes happen. I decided to prepare. I opened my old textbook from English class back home. You know the type. Full of dialogues like, hello, how are you? I am fine, thank you. And you? I am fine as well. Shall we go to the cinema? Perfect. Polite. And completely useless in real life. I found a chapter on making compliments. It had phrases like, you look very nice today and I enjoy your company. I memorized them. I practiced in the mirror. I thought I was ready. I was not ready. The next time Jake and I met for coffee, I had a plan. I would wait for a natural pause, look him in the eye, and say something smooth. Something that would make him realize I wasn't just the awkward girl with bad English. I was the awkward girl with bad English who also had feelings. The pause came. He was telling me about his job, something with computers. I didn't catch most of it, and then he stopped and asked, what about you? What do you miss most from home? Perfect. The perfect moment to say something heartfelt. Instead, my brain reached into its textbook toolbox and pulled out a rusty, inappropriate tool. I smiled my awkward smile and said, you are very nice to look at today. Silence. Jake's face went through about 7 emotions in 2 seconds. Confusion. Surprise. Amusement. More confusion. Then he laughed. Not a small laugh. A loud, coffee-snorting, table-slapping laugh. People turned around. The barista looked over. I wanted to melt into the floor and become a permanent stain on the linoleum. Did you just? He started, wiping his eyes. Did you just tell me I'm nice to look at? I felt my face turn the color of a fire truck. I mean, you look your clothes. I am sorry. My English is bad. He shook his head, still smiling. No. Don't apologize. That was the best compliment I've ever received. It was just unexpected. Here's what I learned that day. Textbook English isn't wrong. It's just weird. Real people don't say, you are very nice to look at. They say you look good, or nice shirt, or even just wow. But my textbook was written by people who apparently thought flirting was a formal business transaction. The science behind this is actually fascinating. When you learn a language from textbooks, you're learning what linguists call prescriptive language, the rules of how you're supposed to speak. But real, everyday language is descriptive, how people actually speak. And those two things are often very different. Native speakers use slang, contractions, fragments, inside jokes, and cultural references. They say hey instead of hello. They say yeah, no when they mean no, and no, yeah when they mean yes. They use tone and facial expressions to change meaning. Textbooks can't teach you that. Only exposure can. But here's the part that surprised me. My embarrassing, textbook-driven compliment didn't scare Jake away. It did the opposite. because it was genuine.
It was awkward, yes.
It was weird, absolutely.
But it was also honest.
And honesty is attractive in any language.
Think about it.
When you're learning a language, you have a superpower that native speakers don't have. You can't hide behind smooth words or clever lines. You're forced to be real. You're forced to say what you actually mean because you don't have the vocabulary to fake it. And good people, respond to that. I remember another disaster a few weeks later. I tried to tell Jake that I missed him when he wasn't around. What came out was, when you go away, my day is less good. Not exactly poetry, but he understood. And he said, I feel the same way.
And that was it.
No fancy words. Just two people with imperfect language, understanding each other perfectly. The biggest mistake I made, and I see so many language learners do this, was trying to sound like a native speaker before I was ready. I wanted to use idioms I didn't fully understand. I wanted to tell jokes that required cultural knowledge I didn't have. I wanted to be smooth and cool and impressive. But that's not how learning works. Here's a metaphor I love. Imagine you're learning to play the piano. You don't start with a Chopin concerto. You start with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. You play it slowly with mistakes until your fingers find the right keys. And then you get a little faster, a little better. And eventually, years later, you can play something beautiful. Language is the same. You don't start with flirty, witty banter. You start with, you are nice to look at. And you laugh at yourself. And you keep going. By the time Jake and I had been hanging out for 2 months, I had made approximately 400 flirting mistakes. I had called him delicious instead of handsome. I had asked, do you want to eat me? When I meant, do you want to eat with me? I had tried to say, you make me happy, and accidentally said, you cook me happy, which, honestly, still made sense because he did make me dinner once. But each mistake made me less afraid. Each awkward moment made me realize that perfection is overrated. Jake wasn't looking for a grammar robot. He was looking for a real person. And real people are messy. So, here's my advice to you. Stop trying to flirt like a movie star. Stop memorizing pickup lines from the internet. Just be yourself. Say what you can say. Use your hands. Use your eyes. And when you say something wrong, laugh. Because that laugh, that shared moment of, oops, I'm learning, is more attractive than any perfectly pronounced sentence. You want to know the real turning point in my love story? It wasn't a clever line. It wasn't a romantic speech. It was the night I stopped trying to be someone I wasn't. I looked at Jake and said, in the simplest English I could manage, I don't have good words, but I like you a lot. And he said, that's the best thing anyone has ever said to me. That's when I knew, not because of what I said, but because of how I said it, without fear, without pretending, just me, my awkward smile, and a heart full of imperfect English. But the real test was yet to come, because falling in love is easy. Understanding each other during fight, that's where the real language learning begins. Learning to train my ears while falling in love. By the time Jake and I had been dating for about a month, yes, dating, because apparently my awkward smile and textbook compliments actually worked, I realized something terrifying. I had somehow agreed to watch a movie with him, at his apartment, without subtitles.
Let me repeat that. No subtitles.
In my language or English. Just me, Jake, a couch, and 2 hours of native speed American dialogue filled with slang, mumbling, and background music designed to make everything harder to hear. I almost canceled 3 times. I practiced excuses in my head. Sorry, my cat is sick. I didn't have a cat. Sorry, I forgot I had a thing. What thing? I had no idea. But the thought of sitting through an entire movie, understanding maybe 30%, and having to fake laugh at jokes I didn't get, that felt like a special kind of torture. But here's the thing about falling in love with a native speaker. You can't hide forever. Eventually, you have to actually listen. And not just listen, understand. So I showed up at his door with sweaty palms and a mental note to smile a lot and nod at appropriate moments. The movie was some romantic comedy. You know the type. Two people meet, they hate each other, then they love each other, then something stupid happens, then they run through an airport. The dialogue was fast. The characters talked over each other. There was a scene where the best friend said something like, "You're totally gonna blow it, dude," and I had no idea what blow it meant. I thought he was talking about an explosion. But here's what surprised me. About 30 minutes in, something shifted. My brain stopped panicking. It stopped trying to translate every single word. Instead, it started doing something much smarter. It started guessing. This is the science part, but stick with me because it's actually cool. Your brain has something called top-down processing. That means it uses context, body language, tone of voice, and your own expectations to fill in the gaps of what you didn't quite hear. When you're watching a movie, you already know the general shape of a rom-com. Boy meets girl. Something goes wrong. They kiss in the rain. Your brain uses that knowledge to predict what's coming next. So when I missed a line of dialogue, I didn't freeze. I looked at Jake's face. He was smiling. So whatever was said, it was probably funny. I smiled too. When a character looked sad, I assumed something bad had happened. And slowly, magically, I started understanding more than I thought I could. By the end of the movie, I had caught maybe 60% of the words. But I had understood about 80% of the story. And that felt like a miracle. Jake turned to me and asked, "Did you like it?" And I said, "Yes." But I didn't understand everything. He laughed and said, "Neither did I. That movie was weird." And just like that, the pressure was gone. That night, I went home and did something I had never done before. I looked at the movie script online and rewatched the scenes I had struggled with. I listened to the same lines 5, 10, 15 times. I repeated them out loud, trying to match the actor's rhythm. I sounded ridiculous. My neighbors probably thought I was having a breakdown. But my ears were learning. Here's the truth about training your ears. It's not about understanding everything the first time. It's about getting comfortable with not understanding. It's about learning to tolerate the discomfort of ambiguity. Because real life doesn't come with subtitles or a replay button. Real life is messy and fast and full of people who mumble. The biggest mistake I see language learners make, and I made it too, is trying to understand every single word. That's not how listening works. Even native speakers miss words. They guess. They infer. They ask, "What did you say?" all the time. The difference is that native speakers don't panic when they miss something. They just fill in the blank and keep going. So I started training my ears like a musician trains their ear for pitch. I listened to the same podcast episode every morning for a week. The first time, I understood maybe 30%. The second time, 40%. By the fifth time, I was catching jokes I had missed. By the seventh time, I could almost repeat entire sentences. I listened to music with lyrics open in another tab. I watched YouTube videos at 0, 75 speed, then normal speed, then 125 speed just for fun. I recorded myself speaking and compared it to native speakers. It was humiliating at first. My accent sounded like a cartoon villain. But slowly, my mouth started to catch up to my ears. And here's the unexpected bonus. The better my listening got, the better my speaking got. Because you can't say a word correctly if you've never really heard it correctly. Your ears have to show your mouth the way. One night, Jake and I were walking through a park near his apartment. It was fall. Leaves were crunching under our feet. He said something quietly, almost to himself. And for the first time, I heard it perfectly. Every word, every syllable. He said, "I'm really glad you sat at my table that day." I didn't smile awkwardly.
I didn't nod and say yes.
I looked at him and said, "Me too." 2 words. Perfectly pronounced. Perfectly understood. He stopped walking and stared at me. "Did you just understand me without asking me to repeat?" I laughed. "I've been training my ears." He kissed me right there in the middle of the park with leaves falling around us like confetti. And I didn't care who saw. Because for the first time in my American life, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't hiding. I was just a girl, in love, understanding and being understood. But training your ears isn't just about romance. It's about survival. Because the next challenge came from a place I never expected. Not from Jake, not from movies, but from a cashier at a grocery store who asked me a question I had no idea how to answer. And that's when I learned the real secret about American culture that no textbook will ever tell you. Cultural traps that no textbook told me about. So there I was, feeling pretty good about myself. My ears were slowly waking up. I could understand Jake most of the time. I had survived a rom-com without subtitles. I was practically a native speaker, right?
Wrong. So wrong.
The universe has a funny way of humbling you right when you start getting confident. For me, that humbling happened at a grocery store. A normal, everyday grocery store. I was buying chicken, rice, and some vegetables, a simple dinner. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that said Deborah, scanned my items and then looked at me and said, "Have a good one." I froze. Have a good one. What is a good one? A good what? A good chicken? A good day? A good life? My brain went into overdrive. I knew she meant something nice, but I didn't know how to respond. Should I say you too? Should I say thanks? Should I say, I will have a good one, and I hope you also have a good one? I smiled my awkward smile, nodded, and said, yes. Deborah looked confused for a second, then smiled back and waved. I walked out of the store holding my grocery bag, my face burning with embarrassment. I had just failed at a simple goodbye. A goodbye that every American says 100 times a day. And I had no idea. That's when I realized learning English isn't just about words and grammar. It's about culture. And American culture has traps everywhere. Traps that no textbook will ever warn you about. Let me give you another example. A few weeks later, Jake invited me to dinner at his parents' house. His mom opened the door, gave me a hug, which already felt strange because in my culture, you don't hug strangers. And then she asked, "How are you?" I said, "I am fine, thank you. And you?" She laughed and said, "Oh, honey, you don't have to be so formal. Just say, good, you."
Wait, what?
All those years of learning, I am fine, thank you. And you? And that was wrong. Too formal? Too weird? Here's the cultural trap. In American English, how are you is not actually a question about your health. It's a greeting, a verbal handshake. The expected answer is not a detailed report of your physical and emotional state. The expected answer is, good, you? Or fine, thanks, or even just hey. That's it. 2 seconds.
Move on.
But my textbook taught me to treat it like a real question. So for months, I had been answering honestly. I am a little tired today because I did not sleep well. People looked at me like I had just recited my medical history. They didn't want to know. They were just being polite. This is what linguists call pragmatics, the hidden rules of conversation that native speakers follow without thinking. Every language has them. But when you're learning a new language, No one teaches you the pragmatics. You have to figure them out by making embarrassing mistakes. Another trap, the word sorry. In my culture, you say sorry when you've done something wrong. In America, people say sorry for everything. They say sorry when they bump into you. They say sorry when you bump into them. They say sorry when they need to sneeze. They say sorry when they're about to ask a question. Sorry, can I ask you something? Sorry for what? You haven't done anything. I remember one time I was on a crowded bus. Someone stepped on my foot. I said, ouch. They said sorry. I said, it's okay. Then I accidentally brushed against someone else, and I said sorry. They said no problem. By the end of the ride, everyone had said sorry at least 4 times. It was like a polite apology orchestra. But here's the really tricky part. When Americans say sorry in a flat tone, they mean it. When they say sorry with a long, sarcastic drawl, they mean you're being an idiot. And when they say sorry, not sorry, they mean I did something I should apologize for, but I'm not going to. Try learning that from a textbook. Then there's the compliment trap. In America, if someone says, I like your shirt, you're supposed to say thanks and maybe mention where you got it. You're not supposed to say, oh, this old thing, or it's nothing special, or deny the compliment. Americans see that as weird. They think you're rejecting their kindness. The first time Jake's mom said, you look so pretty today, I did what I was taught in my culture. I deflected. Oh no, I look normal. This is just a cheap dress. She looked hurt. Jake later explained, when someone gives you a compliment in America, just say thank you. That's it. Don't argue. Such a simple rule. Such a huge cultural difference. And let's talk about flirting culture, because that's what this video is about, right? The awkward smile that brings love. Here's something I learned the hard way. In America, direct eye contact and a smile is often interpreted as flirting. Not always, but often. So all those months when I was just trying to be polite, smiling at strangers on the street, holding eye contact a little too long because I was trying to read their lips, I was accidentally flirting with half the neighborhood. Jake found this hilarious. You know that guy at the coffee shop? He thought you were interested. What? I just wanted a latte. And the mailman? He mentioned you seemed friendly. Oh no. But here's the beautiful part. That same cultural trap, the awkward smile that people misinterpret, is what brought Jake to my table in the first place. He thought I was shy and cute. He thought my awkwardness was charm. He didn't know I was just terrified. And by the time he figured it out, he already liked me. So, here's my advice to you. Don't be afraid of cultural traps. You will fall into them. You will say the wrong thing. You will answer, how are you? With a 10-minute monologue about your digestion. You will say sorry when you mean thank you. You will accidentally flirt with your boss. But every trap you fall into is a lesson. Every mistake is a story. And every story makes you more human, more interesting, and more connected to the people around you. The real secret? Americans are surprisingly forgiving. They know English is hard. They know their culture is weird. Most of them will smile, genuinely, when you mess up. They'll help you. They'll laugh with you, not at you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, one of them will fall in love with your broken, beautiful, awkward English. But cultural traps weren't the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge came when Jake and I had our first real fight. And let me tell you, arguing in a second language is a whole different level of hell. The first big argument, and how broken English saved. Every love story has a moment when the fairy tale hits a wall. For Jake and me, that wall came about 6 months into our relationship. And it wasn't about money or family or any of the big things you expect. It was about something much smaller and much dumber. A text message. Let me set the scene. We had been getting along beautifully. My English was improving. His patience was endless. We laughed at my mistakes. We cooked terrible dinners together. We walked through the park and held hands like we were in one of those cheesy movies I used to watch with subtitles. Then one afternoon, he sent me a text that said, "Can't make it tonight. Something came up." That's it. 6 words. But to my non-native brain, those 6 words felt like a punch in the stomach. Something came up. What something? With who? Why couldn't he tell me? In my culture, when someone says something came up without explaining, it usually means they don't want to see you. It means they're lying. It means something is wrong. So, I did what any reasonable, emotionally stable person would do. I panicked. I wrote back, "What something?" He replied, "Just work stuff. Don't worry."
Just work stuff.
Don't worry. 2 more phrases that meant nothing to me. What is work stuff? Is that a meeting? A deadline? A coworker he liked more than me? I spent the entire evening spiraling. I checked his social media. I reread our old messages. I convinced myself he was losing interest. By the time he called me that night, I was a mess. And when he said, "Hey, sorry about tonight, I'll make it up to you," I didn't say okay or no problem like a normal person. I said, "You don't have to lie to me." Silence. Then, what? You said something came up. That is not real. You just don't want to see me. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Jake's voice, different than I had ever heard it. Not warm. Not patient. Frustrated. "Are you serious right now? I had a deadline. My boss asked me to stay late. That's literally all it was." "But you didn't say that. You said something came up. That means nothing." "It means exactly what it says. Something came up. Why are you making this into a thing?" And just like that, we were fighting. Really fighting. Not the cute, "oops, I used the wrong word" kind of fighting. The kind where voices get louder and words get sharper, and suddenly you're both angry and confused and neither of you knows how to stop. Here's what I learned that night. Arguing in a second language is both terrible and wonderful. Terrible because you don't have the vocabulary to defend yourself. Wonderful because you also don't have the vocabulary to destroy the other person. Think about it. When native speakers fight, they have a whole arsenal of weapons. Sarcasm, insults, passive-aggressive comments, emotional manipulation. They know exactly which words will hurt the most. But when you're arguing in a second language, you don't have those weapons. You only have the basic, honest, simple words. And sometimes that's exactly what a fight needs. I couldn't tell Jake he was being dismissive of my emotional needs. I didn't know that word. I said, "You made me feel small." I couldn't accuse him of gaslighting or invalidating my feelings. I said, "You think I am crazy, but I am not crazy. I am just scared." And that word, scared, stopped the fight. Jake's voice softened. "Scared of what?" "Scared you will leave. Scared I am not enough. Scared my English is so bad that you will get tired of explaining everything to me." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I'm not going anywhere. I just had a deadline. I'm sorry I didn't explain better. I didn't know you needed more details." "I didn't know I needed more details either," I said. "Now I know." We stayed on the phone for another hour. Not fighting.
Talking.
I explained that in my culture, vague excuses mean something bad. He explained that in American work culture, something came up is totally normal and doesn't mean anyone is lying. I learned a new phrase that night. It's not that deep. Americans say this when something is simple and you're overcomplicating it. It's not that deep. I just had work. The science behind this is actually really interesting. Psychologists have studied how language affects conflict resolution. They found that people who argue in a second language are often more rational and less emotional than people arguing in their native language.
Why?
Because the emotional distance of a second language gives your brain a cooling off period. You can't fire off a perfect, hurtful insult because you don't know how. So you have to slow down. You have to choose your words carefully. You have to actually think about what you mean. That night, Jake and I made a rule. When we fight, and we knew there would be more fights, we would never assume bad intentions. If something was unclear, we would ask, not accuse.
Ask.
What did you mean by that? Instead of, why are you doing this to me? Such a small change. Such a huge difference. The other thing I learned? It's okay to say, I don't have the words for this right now. In fact, that phrase saved us more times than I can count. When I felt overwhelmed, I would say, my English is too small for this conversation. Can we pause? And Jake would wait. He would hold my hand or make tea or just sit in silence until I found my words. Here's the truth about love and language. You will misunderstand each other. You will fight about stupid things like text messages and tone and what fine really means. But if you're both willing to be patient, if you're both willing to ask instead of assume, if you're both willing to laugh at the absurdity of two people trying to love each other in a language that neither of them speaks perfectly, then you'll be okay. That first fight didn't break us. It made us stronger because we proved something to each other. We proved that we could be angry and still kind. We proved that we could disagree and still listen. We proved that broken English, messy, imperfect, frustrating broken English, was enough to fix what had broken between us. And that's when I started to believe, really believe, that this relationship might last. Not because we never fought, but because we knew how to come back to each other after the fight. But the biggest test was still ahead. Because a few months later, Jake got down on one knee, and I had to say the most important words of my life, in a language I was still learning. From B1 to C2, without opening a single textbook. Remember that feeling I described earlier? The one where you're standing in a coffee shop, someone asks you a simple question, and your brain turns into a dial-up modem from 1999? I lived there for a long time. But somewhere between the awkward smile and the first fight, and the movie nights without subtitles, something started to shift. I stopped thinking of myself as a language learner. I started thinking of myself as a person who happens to be learning a language. And that small change in identity made all the difference. Let me explain what I mean by B1 and C2. If you're not familiar with the common European framework, here's the quick version. B1 is intermediate. You can handle everyday situations, but you make mistakes. You understand slow, clear speech. C2 is mastery, or proficient. You understand almost everything. You express yourself fluently, and you can handle complex topics. The jump from B1 to C2 is huge. Most people spend years in classes trying to make that leap. I didn't take a single class. I didn't open a single textbook. And yet, over 2 years, my ears went from cotton-filled confusion to catching sarcasm, jokes, and even regional accents.
How?
Not through magic. Through something much more boring and much more exciting at the same time. Through living. Here's the science. When you learn a language in a classroom, you're using what psychologists call explicit learning. You study rules. You memorize vocabulary. You take tests. It's conscious, effortful, and slow. But when you learn through real life, conversations, arguments, love notes, grocery store interactions, you're using implicit learning. Your brain absorbs patterns without you even noticing. It's the same way you learned your first language as a child.
No grammar lessons.
Just exposure, repetition, and a whole lot of mistakes. The problem is that implicit learning feels like nothing is happening. You don't see progress day to day. You wake up, you struggle to understand the news. You feel like an idiot. But underneath the surface, your brain is building connections. Thousands of them. Every time you hear a word in context, your brain strengthens a tiny neural pathway. Every time you force yourself to speak, even though you're embarrassed, your brain rewires itself to make that fear a little smaller next time. I started measuring my progress not by tests, but by tiny, almost invisible moments. The first time I understood a joke on a TV show without rewinding. The first time I corrected Jake's grammar, and I was right. The first time I dreamed in English. The first time I said, "bless you," when someone sneezed without having to think about it. Each of those moments felt like a small miracle. And each one happened because I had stopped trying to learn English and started trying to live my life in English. Let me give you a concrete example. I love cooking. Back home, I followed recipes in my native language. When I moved to the US, I made a rule: no more recipes in my language. Only English. At first, it was painful. What is simmer? What is dice? What is fold in the cheese? I ruined 3 dinners. But by the 10th recipe, I knew those words like I knew my own name. And I hadn't studied a single flashcard. I had just been hungry. Another example. Jake introduced me to his group of friends. They were nice, but they talked fast. They used inside jokes. They referenced movies I had never seen. For months, I sat in silence, smiling awkwardly, understanding maybe half of what they said. But I kept showing up. I kept listening. And one night, about 8 months in, someone made a joke, and I laughed before anyone else did. Jake looked at me with his mouth open. "You got that?" he said. I had. And it felt better than any test score. The CFR levels are useful, but they're also a trap. They make you think that language learning is a ladder. First B1, then B2, then C1, then C2. But real life isn't a ladder. It's a messy, tangled jungle. Some days you're C2 in the morning and A2 by lunchtime because you're tired. Some topics you know perfectly. Others make you feel like a beginner again. I remember the day I realized I had truly reached a new level. I was at a doctor's appointment alone. No Jake to translate. No phone dictionary. The doctor used medical terms I had never heard. But instead of panicking, I said, "Can you explain that in simpler words?" And he did. And I understood. And then I asked a follow-up question. And he answered. And we had a complete adult conversation about my health. In English. Walking out of that office, I almost cried. Not because I was sick. I was fine. I cried because 2 years earlier, I couldn't order coffee without sweating. Now I was discussing medical options with a stranger. That's not a small thing. That's everything. Here's what I want you to take away from this section. You don't need a classroom. You don't need a textbook. You don't need to memorize word lists or do grammar drills. You need to live. You need to put yourself in situations where you have no choice but to use English. You need to get uncomfortable. You need to make mistakes. You need to laugh at yourself. And then you need to do it all again tomorrow. The jump from B1 to C2 isn't about knowing more words. It's about trusting yourself with the words you already know. It's about being okay with not being perfect. It's about realizing that fluency isn't the absence of mistakes, it's the presence of confidence. And speaking of confidence, I was about to need every ounce of it I had, because Jake had bought a ring. And I was about to say I do in a language I still sometimes messed up, in front of 100 people, including his very sweet, very English-speaking grandmother. But that's a story for the next section. And trust me, it involves tears, laughter, and a grammatical error that made everyone cry even harder. Wedding vows with grammatical mistakes. The moment Jake got down on one knee, My brain did something I still laugh about today. It didn't say yes right away. It said, oh no, I have to speak in front of people now. Because here's the thing about weddings in America. They're not private. They're not just two people signing papers in a quiet room. They're a show, a performance. 100 eyes staring at you while you say the most important words of your life. And if you're me, someone who still sometimes says, I feel hungry for you instead of I miss you, that's terrifying. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. And then I had 6 months to prepare for the scariest public speaking event of my life. Let me back up a little. In my culture, weddings are big, but the couple doesn't usually write their own vows. You follow a script, a traditional, predictable, safe script. But Jake wanted to write our own vows. He wanted them to be personal, real, from the heart. I tried to convince him otherwise. Can't we just say the normal words? The ones everyone says? He looked at me like I had suggested we get married in a parking lot. You want boring? He asked. After everything we've been through? No way. We're writing our own. So I sat down with a notebook and a pen. And I stared at a blank page for 3 hours. What do you say to someone who saw you at your most awkward, your most broken English? Your most, I accidentally said I was pregnant instead of embarrassed self? How do you thank someone for being patient when you took 30 seconds to form a simple sentence? How do you promise forever in a language you still sometimes mess up? I wrote draft after draft. I used Google Translate way too much. I asked Jake's mom to check my grammar, which was embarrassing because she was going to hear the vows anyway. I practiced in the mirror. I recorded myself on my phone. I sounded like a robot reciting a shopping list. Then, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I gave up on perfect. Here's what I realized. The most beautiful moments in our relationship weren't the ones where I spoke perfectly. They were the ones where I spoke honestly. The time I said, you make my heart do a happy dance instead of I love you. The time I said, my day is less good without you, instead of I missed you. The time I said, you are my favorite person to be confused with, I meant confused by, but it came out wrong, and we laughed so hard we cried. Those imperfect sentences were more real than anything a textbook could teach me. So I stopped trying to sound like a native speaker. I started trying to sound like myself. The morning of the wedding, I was a nervous wreck. Not about the marriage. I knew I wanted to marry Jake. I was nervous about the vows. About standing in front of 100 native English speakers, his family, his friends, his sweet grandmother who had trouble hearing, and speaking from my heart in a language that still felt like wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. The ceremony started. The music played. I walked down the aisle. Jake was crying before I even got to the altar. That helped. A little. Then it was time. The officiant said, Jake, please share your vows. Jake went first. His vows were beautiful. Perfect grammar. Perfect pronunciation. He talked about my smile, the awkward one, and how it made him want to know me. He talked about my courage. He talked about how I taught him that love doesn't need perfect words. Everyone sniffled. Then the officiant looked at me. And now your vows. I took a deep breath. I looked at Jake. And I forgot everything I had practiced. Here's what actually came out of my mouth, and I'm not making this up. I said, Jake, before you, I was scared every day. Scared to talk. Scared to make mistake. Scared that people will laugh at my English. But you never laughed. Well, you laughed, but not at me. With me. A few people chuckled. Good. You teach me that broken English is still English. You teach me that I love you sounds the same even when the grammar is wrong. You teach me that home is not a place where everyone speaks perfect. Home is a place where someone understands you even when you say pass the salt, but you meant hold my hand. At this point, Jake was crying openly. His grandmother was crying. I was crying. I don't have big words. I don't have fancy sentences. But I have this. You are my favorite person to be confused with. I meant confused by. But you know what I mean. The whole crowd laughed. And clapped.
And cried.
I promise to keep learning. I promise to keep making mistakes. I promise to keep saying the wrong word and letting you guess what I meant. And I promise that every day, even when my English is bad, my love for you is not bad. It is the best thing I have. And I give it to you. All of it. Forever. I finished. Silence for 1 second. Then Jake pulled me into a kiss before the officiant could say, "You may now kiss the bride." And his grandmother, sweet, elderly, hard-of-hearing grandmother, stood up and shouted, "That was better than the movie." Here's the science part because I promised you some science. Psychologists have studied what makes wedding vows memorable. It's not perfect grammar. It's authenticity. It's vulnerability. It's the moments when the speaker reveals something real about themselves. When you speak in a second language, you can't hide behind fancy words or clever rhetoric. You have to be nakedly, painfully honest. And people feel that. They cry not because you said it right. They cry because you meant it. I made at least 7 grammatical mistakes in my vows. I used the wrong tense twice. I said teach instead of taught. I said people will laugh when I meant people would laugh. And no one cared. Not one person. Because they weren't listening for mistakes. They were listening for love. That night, after the reception, after the cake and the dancing and the toasts, Jake and I sat on the hotel balcony. He held my hand and said, "You know, I don't remember a single error in your vows. I just remember how I felt." And that's when I understood something I want you to understand too. Language is a tool. A beautiful, complicated, frustrating tool. But it is not the thing itself. The thing itself is connection, understanding,
love.
And love doesn't need a C2 certificate. Love just needs you to try. So if you're out there, terrified of making mistakes, terrified of sounding stupid, terrified of saying the wrong thing in English, please hear me. Your mistakes are not weaknesses. They are proof that you're trying. And trying is the most attractive thing in any language. But the journey wasn't over. Because after the wedding came the real challenge. Children. Little humans who would grow up speaking English better than me. And that, my friends, is a whole different kind of humbling. Having kids in America, when my children became my teachers, the day my first child corrected my English, I wanted to crawl under a rock and never come out. She was 3 years old. 3. Barely out of diapers. And she looked at me with her big, innocent eyes and said, "Mommy, it's not I putted the toy. It's I put the toy. There's no putted." She stared back. Jake, standing in the kitchen, pretended to be very interested in washing a spoon that was already clean. "That's right, baby," I said, trying to smile. "Mommy is still learning." She nodded, completely satisfied, and went back to playing with her blocks. She had no idea she had just shattered my confidence into a million tiny pieces. To her, she was just helping. To me, it was proof that my own child, a child I had carried, birthed, and fed, already spoke better English than I ever would. Welcome to parenthood in a second language. Here's something no one warns you about before you have kids in a country where you're not a native speaker. Your children will not learn English from you. They will learn it from the world. From daycare, from TV, from friends, from their other parent. And by the time they're 3 or 4, they will speak it more naturally, more effortlessly, more correctly than you. And they will correct you. Mercilessly. Adorably. Constantly. My daughter, Sophia, was my first teacher. She taught me that sheep is both singular and plural, no sheeps. She taught me that yesterday I run is wrong. It's yesterday I ran. She taught me the difference between two, and two, not through worksheets, but through pointing at my texts and saying, "Mommy, that's the wrong one." At first, it stung. My ego, already bruised from years of awkward smiles and grocery store confusion, took a real beating. But then something shifted. I realized that Sophia wasn't judging me.
She was helping me.
The same way I helped her learn to tie her shoes or brush her teeth. In her mind, we were just two people learning from each other. That reframe changed everything. My son, Lucas, was even more direct. At 4 years old, he asked me, "Mommy, why do you say I eat it? It's I ate. Don't you know that?" I said, "I know now."
"Thank you, baby."
He said, "You're welcome. Do you want me to teach you more?" And just like that, I had a 4-year-old grammar tutor who worked for hugs and goldfish crackers. Here's the science. Children's brains are wired for language acquisition in a way that adult brains simply are not. It's called the critical period hypothesis. Before puberty, your brain absorbs language like a sponge, implicitly, effortlessly, without conscious effort. After puberty, that window starts to close. You can still learn, but it's harder, slower, more effortful. So when my children corrected me, they weren't being mean. They were just using their sponge-like, superpowered, native speaker brains to notice patterns I couldn't hear. They heard putted and knew, instinctively, that it was wrong. I had to memorize that rule. They just felt it. But here's the beautiful part. Having kids in America didn't just make me a better English speaker. It made me a better human. Because I had to learn to be okay with being wrong. I had to learn to say thank you for teaching me to a person who still needed help reaching the sink. I had to learn that being a good mother wasn't about speaking perfectly. It was about showing up,
Trying.
apologizing when I messed up, and trying again. One night, Sophia asked me to read her a bedtime story. It was a book I had never seen before, full of rhymes and wordplay and silly made-up names. I stumbled. I mispronounced Worcestershire so badly that Sophia laughed so hard she snorted. Then she said, "It's okay, Mommy. I like when you read even when you say it wrong. It's funnier." That was the moment I stopped being ashamed. My kids don't love me because my English is perfect. They love me because I'm their mom. Because I make them pancakes on Saturday mornings. Because I kiss their boo-boos and listen to their stories and show up at school plays even when I'm tired. The language is just the container. The love is the content. And honestly, having kids made me a more confident English speaker. Because I stopped caring so much about what strangers thought. I had bigger things to worry about. Diaper changes. Sleepless nights. Whether Sophia had eaten anything green in the past week. When you're elbow deep in parenthood, you don't have the energy to be embarrassed about a misplaced preposition. I also learned a ton of new vocabulary from my kids. Words I never would have learned in a textbook. Booger. Tummy ache. Blankie.
Potty.
Diaper rash. Why? Asked 47 times in a row. I'm not tired, which actually means I'm exhausted, but I don't want to go to bed. These are the real words of American family life. And I learned them all from two tiny humans who had no idea they were teaching me. There was also the cultural side. My kids brought home American traditions I had never heard of. The tooth fairy, we didn't have that in my country. The elf on the shelf, what even is that? And why is it so creepy? School events like parent-teacher conferences and field day and show and tell. Every new tradition was a new English lesson. And every lesson came with a story. One time, Lucas came home from kindergarten and asked, "Mommy, what's a boomer?" I said, "I think it's a generation of people." He said, No, my friend said you're a boomer because you don't know TikTok. I was 34 years old. I am not a boomer. But I learned that day that boomer is sometimes just a joke about being old or out of touch. My own child was teaching me slang. Slang I couldn't find in any dictionary. Here's my advice to anyone raising kids in a second language. Let them correct you. Thank them when they do.
Turn it into a game.
Make mommy's English mistake of the day a dinner table tradition. Laugh at yourself because your kids are watching. And if they see you embarrassed and ashamed, they'll learn to be embarrassed and ashamed when they make mistakes. But if they see you try, fail, laugh, and try again, they'll learn resilience. They'll learn courage. They'll learn that perfection is overrated. And honestly, those little teachers of mine, Sophia and Lucas, they're the reason I finally stopped caring about being perfect.
They love me anyway.
They've always loved me anyway. And if they can love my broken English, maybe I can love it too. But the biggest test of my English confidence was still to come. Not marriage. Not parenthood. Something scarier. A job interview. With real American professionals. Who would judge me not as a mother or a wife, but as someone who needed to prove her worth with words. And that interview did not go the way I expected. The job interview that proved my broken English was enough. You'd think that after surviving a cross-cultural romance, a wedding with grammatical vows, and 2 kids who treat me like their personal English correction project, I'd feel invincible. You'd be wrong. Because none of those things prepared me for the terror of a job interview. In English. With 3 native speakers staring at me from across a table, clipboards in hand, waiting to judge every word that came out of my mouth. Here's the backstory. By the time my daughter started preschool, I had been in the U.S. for almost 4 years. I had improved. A lot. I could gossip with other moms at the playground. I could complain to customer service on the phone without breaking into a sweat. I could even understand Jake's grandmother, who mumbled and spoke in fragments and refused to wear her hearing aids. But a job interview? That felt different. That felt like being back in the coffee shop, frozen under the fluorescent lights, smiling awkwardly while my brain screamed, abort mission. The job was at a small nonprofit, something in community outreach, helping immigrants, ironically. The job description said things like excellent communication skills and ability to engage diverse stakeholders. I read those words and felt a cold wave of imposter syndrome wash over me. Excellent communication skills? In English? I once told my boss at a volunteer gig that I was constipated when I meant committed.
True story.
She laughed so hard, she choked on her coffee. But Jake pushed me. You're perfect for this job, he said. You understand the immigrant experience better than anyone. And your English is fine. More than fine. I wanted to believe him. But the voice in my head, the one that had been there since my first awkward smile, kept whispering, they're going to laugh at you. They're going to ask questions you can't answer. You're going to freeze. I prepared like a maniac. I wrote down possible questions and practiced answers out loud. I recorded myself and cringed at my accent. I memorized fancy words like synergy and utilize, even though I hated how they felt in my mouth. I watched YouTube videos about job interviews until my eyes blurred. By the night before the interview, I had a 12-page document of bullet points and a stomach full of butterflies the size of small birds. The morning of the interview, I stood in front of the mirror and gave myself a pep talk. You can do this. You have survived worse. Remember the time you told the pediatrician that your daughter had explosive diarrhea when you meant a little gas?
You survived that.
You can survive anything. Not exactly inspiring, but it was honest. I walked into the office building, shook hands with the interview panel, 3 women in blazers, all kind-faced but intimidating, and sat down. The first question came. Tell us about yourself.
Standard.
I had practiced this. I took a breath. And then I did something I hadn't planned. Instead of reciting my memorized, perfectly grammatical answer, I told the truth. I'm an immigrant, I said. I came here 7 years ago with very bad English. I mean, really bad. I once asked a barista for hot water with lemon, and she brought me a cup of hot water with a lemon-scented candle floating in it. I didn't know the word slice. One of the interviewers laughed. A real laugh, not a polite one. I'm telling you this, I continued, because this job is about helping immigrants. And I want you to know that I understand what they're going through. Not because I studied it, because I lived it. My English is still not perfect. I make mistakes every day, but I also help other immigrants now. I translate for neighbors. I drive friends to doctor's appointments. I explain school forms to parents who are too scared to ask. I paused. My heart was pounding. So, if you're looking for someone with perfect grammar and a native accent, that's not me. But if you're looking for someone who knows how hard it is to say, I need help in a language you're still learning, someone who will never, ever make a client feel stupid for their broken English, then I'm your person. Silence. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Then the lead interviewer, a woman named Carol with silver hair and warm eyes, put down her pen and said, That was the best answer I've heard in 10 years of doing these interviews. I didn't get the job because of my vocabulary. I didn't get it because of my perfect pronunciation or my fancy business words. I got it because I was real. Because I showed up as myself, awkward smile and all, and let them see the person behind the language. Here's the science. Psychologists have studied what makes job interviews successful. It's not just competence. It's likability. It's authenticity. It's the feeling that the person sitting across from you is trustworthy and real. When you're a non-native speaker, you have a strange advantage. You can't hide behind corporate jargon or slick sales pitches. You have to be genuine. And genuine is memorable. I started the job 2 weeks later. On my first day, Carol pulled me aside and said, You know why we hired you? I shook my head. Because you made us feel something. The other candidates all said the right words. But you told a story. And stories stick. She was right. Over the next few years, I helped dozens of immigrants navigate paperwork, find housing, enroll their kids in school. And every time I sat across from someone who was struggling with English, I smiled, not awkwardly this time, but warmly, and said, I know. I've been there. Let's figure this out together. That job taught me something I want you to hear. Your English doesn't have to be perfect to be valuable. You don't have to sound like a CNN anchor to deserve a seat at the table. You just have to show up.
Try.
Be kind. And let your broken, beautiful, imperfect voice be heard. Because here's the truth that no textbook will tell you. Native speakers make mistakes too.
They use the wrong there.
They say could've instead of could have. They forget words and say thingamajig and whatchamacallit. The difference is that they don't apologize for it. And neither should you. The interview was a turning point. Not because I got the job, though that was nice, but because I finally stopped seeing my English as a weakness. I started seeing it as proof. Proof that I had worked hard. Proof that I had crossed oceans, literal and metaphorical. Proof that I was brave enough to try. And that bravery? It built a life, a home, a family, a career. All on the foundation of an awkward smile and a willingness to be imperfect. But the best part of the story was still ahead. Because with the job came stability. With stability came a house. And with that house came a moment when I really realized that I was home. Building a family, a home, and a life. One awkward smile at a time. So here we are. The part of the story where I'm supposed to say, and then everything was perfect.
But you know me better than that by now.
Perfect isn't my style. Awkward is my style. And honestly, awkward has built a pretty beautiful life. Let me paint you a picture of a typical Tuesday morning in my house. The alarm goes off at 6:30. I stumble to the kitchen to make coffee. Sophia, now 7, appears in her unicorn pajamas and announces that she literally can't even with her math homework. Lucas, 5, follows behind her, holding a toy dinosaur and asking why the sun is already out there doing its job. Jake is making pancakes and singing along to some 80s rock song, badly. And I am standing in the middle of all of it, smiling.
Not an awkward smile this time.
A real one. This is my life now. A small house in a quiet neighborhood. A garden where I try to grow tomatoes and mostly grow weeds. A minivan with goldfish crackers crushed into the back seat. A husband who still laughs when I say I'm going to wash the clothes instead of do the laundry. 2 kids who speak English so fluently that they sometimes have to translate idioms for me. Mom, spill the tea doesn't mean actual tea.
It means gossip. Oh, good to know.
How did I get here? One awkward smile at a time. Let me back up a little. After the job interview, after the wedding, after the kids started school, something shifted inside me. I stopped measuring my English by how many mistakes I made. I started measuring it by how much I could connect. And the answer was a lot. More than I ever thought possible. I remember a specific moment that felt like a milestone. I was at a parent-teacher conference for Sophia. Alone. Jake was traveling for work. I walked into the classroom, sat across from her teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, and had a 20-minute conversation about my daughter's reading level, her social skills, and whether she was sharing appropriately. Apparently not. I understood everything. I responded to everything. I even made a joke about how Sophia gets her stubbornness from me. Mrs. Patterson laughed. A real laugh, not the pity laugh. Walking out of that school, I called Jake and said, I just did a parent-teacher conference. In English. By myself. He said, that's great, babe. You've done that before. And I realized he was right. I had. Somewhere along the way, without noticing, I had stopped being the woman who froze at the grocery store checkout. I had become just a mom. A mom who happens to have an accent. A mom who sometimes says, yesterday I go, instead of yesterday I went. A mom who is loved anyway. Here's the science of belonging. Psychologists talk about something called integration versus assimilation. Assimilation means giving up your old identity to fit into a new one. Integration means keeping who you are while also becoming part of something new. For years, I thought I had to assimilate. I thought I had to sound American, act American, think American. But that was exhausting. And it didn't work. What worked was integration. I kept my accent. I kept my cultural traditions. I kept my awkward smile. But I also learned to love baseball games and Thanksgiving turkey and saying "ope" when I bump into someone. I became both. Not half and half. Whole and whole. A person with 2 homes. One in my heart, one in my new country. My kids are helping me build that integration every day. They celebrate both cultures. They eat rice with chopsticks and mac and cheese with a fork. They say grandma with an American accent and ba with the correct tones. They correct my English and then ask me to teach them words from my language. They are not confused. They are not torn. They are simply both. And that, I think, is the real American story. Not melting pot, where everyone becomes the same. But mosaic where every piece keeps its color and together makes something beautiful. Building a home in a new language is like building a house out of mismatched bricks. Some bricks are perfect. Some are cracked. Some are the wrong shape entirely, but you keep stacking them. And eventually you look around and realize you have walls, a roof, a place where you feel safe. I remember the first time I said, "I'll be right back" to Jake and didn't have to think about it. The words just came out, like they lived in my mouth, like they belonged there. That's fluency, not perfection.
Ease.
The other day, Lucas asked me, "Mommy, do you dream in English or in your language?" I thought about it. Both, I said. Sometimes I dream in a mix. My brain doesn't care. It just wants to tell stories. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Because to him, mixing languages is normal. To him, I'm not someone learning English. I'm just mom. Here's what I want you to take away from this section. Building a life in a second language is hard. Really hard. There will be days when you want to give up. Days when you feel like a fraud. Days when a cashier says, "Have a good one," and you still, after all these years, have a tiny moment of panic. But there will also be days when you make your child laugh by saying, "Pass the elephant," instead of "pass the syrup." Days when your spouse looks at you with so much love that you forget you ever worried about grammar. Days when you realize that you have built something real, something lasting, something beautiful, not despite your broken English, but because of it. Because broken English taught me humility. It taught me patience. It taught me that love doesn't need perfect sentences. It taught me to listen harder, try harder, and forgive myself more. And those lessons? They made me a better wife, a better mother, a better human. So if you're out there, still struggling, still smiling awkwardly, still feeling like you don't belong, please hear me. You belong.
Right now.
Exactly as you are. Your accent is not a flaw. Your mistakes are not failures. They are proof that you are brave enough to try. And trying is everything. My life today is not perfect. My English is not perfect. But it is mine. And it is full. Full of love, full of laughter, full of tiny moments that no textbook could ever teach me. And now I want to leave you with one final thought. The thing that took me from awkward smile to American love story. The thing that I wish someone had told me on day one. From awkward smile to American love story. Your turn now. Do you remember that first awkward smile I told you about? The one in the coffee shop, the tight-lipped, wide-eyed. I have no idea what you just said, but I'll nod anyway, grin. That smile has a name now. I call it my gateway smile. Because it opened a door I didn't even know existed. Here's what I've learned after 7 years of awkward smiles, grammatical disasters, and a love story that started with a misunderstanding. Fluency is not the absence of mistakes. Fluency is the presence of courage. Let me say that again, because it's the most important thing I will ever tell you. You don't need perfect English to be understood. You don't need a native accent to be loved. You don't need a C2 certificate to build a life, a family, a home. You just need to show up.
Try.
Smile. Even awkwardly. And keep going. I think about all the moments I almost gave up. The night I cried into my pillow because I couldn't understand a single joke at a party. The time I pretended my phone was ringing so I could escape a conversation I was losing. The day my daughter corrected my grammar and I felt like the worst mother in the world. Those moments were real. They hurt. But they were also the raw material of my transformation. Because every time I didn't give up, I got a little stronger. Every time I said, "Sorry, can you repeat that?" Instead of smiling and nodding, I got a little braver. Every time I made a mistake and laughed instead of cried, I got a little more free. Here's the science of courage. Psychologists have studied what makes people persist in difficult tasks. It's not talent. It's not intelligence. It's something called grit, the willingness to keep going even when you fail. And here's the beautiful part. Grit is not fixed. You can grow it. Every time you choose to speak even though you're scared, you water the seed of grit. Every time you ask for help instead of hiding, you make it stronger. Every time you laugh at your own mistake, you give it sunlight. My grit grew one awkward interaction at a time. The first time I called the doctor's office by myself. The first time I complained about a bill. The first time I stood up in a meeting at work and shared an idea in English with native speakers who had fancy degrees and faster tongues. Each of those moments was terrifying, but each one made the next one slightly less terrifying. And now I'm the person who helps other immigrants make those same terrifying calls. I sit across from someone who just arrived, whose hands are shaking, whose English is breaking at the seams, and I say, I know. I've been there. Let's do this together. And when they make a mistake, I don't correct them harshly. I smile, warmly, genuinely, and say, that was brave. Try again. That's the gift of the awkward smile. It connects you to people who have been where you are. And once you've been through the fire, you get to hold the door open for the next person. So, here's my final question for you. What would happen if you stopped waiting until your English is good enough? What would happen if you started today? Not next month. Not after you finish that textbook. Not when you feel ready. Today. Because here's the secret that no one tells you. You will never feel ready. The fear never completely goes away. I still get nervous before important calls. I still rehearse sentences in my head. I still sometimes say, I'm boring when I mean I'm bored. But the difference is that I don't let the fear stop me anymore. I invite it along for the ride. I say, hi fear. I see you. Now sit in the back seat while I drive. Your awkward smile is not a weakness. It is a bridge. Every time you use it, you are saying, I don't know everything, but I'm trying. And trying is enough. Think about the people in your life. The ones who love you. Do they love you because your grammar is perfect? Do they love you because you never make mistakes? No. They love you because you're you. Because you show up. Because you care. Because you try. And the same will be true in English. The people worth knowing will not judge your accent. They will celebrate your courage. I want to leave you with one final image. It's a Tuesday morning in my house. The sun is coming through the kitchen windows. Sophia is eating cereal and telling me about a dream she had. Lucas is building a tower out of blocks and knocking it down on purpose. Jake is making coffee and humming off key. And I am standing in the middle of it all, holding a mug that says, World's okayest mom. A gift from Jake after I messed up another idiom. My English is still not perfect. It never will be. And I don't need it to be. Because perfect is not the goal. Connection is the goal. Love is the goal. Life is the goal. And those things don't require a native speaker's tongue. They just require an open heart and a willingness to be awkward. So go ahead. Smile at that stranger. Order that coffee. Make that mistake. Laugh at yourself. Fall in love with the process. Because on the other side of your awkward smile is a life you can't even imagine yet. A life full of people who will understand you, not despite your broken English, but because of the person you become while learning it. You've got this. And I'll be right here, awkward smiling right along with you. So here we are. End of the story. But honestly, it's not an end. It's a beginning. Your beginning. Because that awkward smile you've been hiding, the one you flash when you don't understand, when you feel small, when you want to disappear, that smile is not your enemy. It's your superpower. It's proof that you're still in the game. Still trying. Still brave enough to be imperfect. Every person you've met in this video, the frozen coffee shop girl, the stuttering dater, the mom who got corrected by her toddler, the job candidate who told the truth, that was me. But it was also you. Because every language learner shares the same heart, the same fear, the same quiet hope that one day it'll get easier. And it does. Not because you become perfect, but because you stop needing to be. Here's what I want you to do right now. Before you click away, before you scroll to the next video,
Pause. Take a breath.
and ask yourself, what's one thing I've been avoiding because my English isn't ready? A conversation? A phone call? A job application? A smile at someone who might become important? Now imagine doing it anyway. Imagine messing up.
Imagine alguém.
Imagine waking up the next day and realizing the world didn't end. Imagine trying again. That's the secret. That's the whole thing. You don't learn to speak by studying. You learn to speak by speaking badly, then slightly less badly, then one day, without noticing, well enough. So, here's my invitation to you. Don't watch this video once and forget it. Save it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And then come back for more. Because this channel is not about grammar rules or vocabulary lists. It's about stories. Real stories. Your stories. Stories that prove that broken English can build beautiful lives. If this video made you feel something, if it made you laugh, cry, or even just breathe a little easier, then do 3 things for me right now. 1. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I want a number, because I want to remind you every single week that you're not alone, that your awkward smile is welcome here, that your mistakes are not failures, they're proof of courage. 2. Leave a comment in English. 1 sentence. It doesn't have to be perfect. Tell me, what's the most awkward thing you've ever said in English? I'll read every single one. And I promise, your comment will make someone else feel less alone. 3. Share this video with one person who's struggling. Text it to a friend. Post it on your story. Send it to that coworker who always apologizes for their accent. Because the best way to learn is together. And the best way to feel brave is to remind someone else that they are too. Thank you for staying with me through 12 sections. Through the awkward smiles, the flirting disasters, the wedding mistakes, the kids who corrected me, and the job interview that changed everything. My English is still not perfect, but my life is full, and yours can be too.
So subscribe, comment, share,
and keep smiling, even when it's awkward. Because that smile, it's already bringing you closer to love, to home, to the person you're becoming. See you in the next video.